He coached at a suicide hotline. He worked for the Republican Party. He was handsome, articulate, and magnetic. Women trusted him. Men admired him. His law professors praised him. He was also, by his own eventual admission, one of the most prolific and brutal serial killers in American history, responsible for the murders of at least 30 young women and girls across 7 states throughout the 1970s. This is not a story about a monster who looked like a monster. This is a story about how ordinary evil can be, and why that is the most terrifying thing of all. This is the life of Theodore Robert Bundy. A content note before we begin. This video discusses real murders, sexual violence, and the real lives of real victims. We approach these subjects with the seriousness they deserve. Our purpose is historical understanding, not glorification. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, to a young unmarried woman named Eleanor Louise Cowell, known as Louise. His biological father has never been definitively identified, though several theories have been investigated over the decades. The circumstances of his birth were kept secret, a common practice in mid-century America, where illegitimacy carried deep social stigma. For the first years of his life, Ted was raised by his maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, in Philadelphia. His mother was presented to the outside world and to young Ted as his sister, not his mother. This deception, and the moment of its unraveling, has long been cited by biographers as a foundational wound. Bundy himself reportedly struggled deeply with questions of identity and legitimacy throughout his life. In 1950, Louise moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington, where she married a man named Johnny Culpepper Bundy. Ted took his stepfather's surname, becoming Theodore Robert Bundy, the name history would remember. The marriage gave Ted 4 half-siblings, but by multiple accounts, he never truly bonded with his stepfather, whom he reportedly viewed with barely concealed contempt. Signs of what was to come. Childhood friends and neighbors of Bundy would later recall early warning signs. His Aunt Julia recalled waking up one morning to find herself surrounded by knives, placed around her sleeping body by a 3-year-old Ted, who stood watching her with a smile. By adolescence, Bundy exhibited what psychologists retrospectively identify as classic antisocial traits: a fascination with violent imagery, a discomfort with normal emotional bonding, and a consuming preoccupation with status and appearance. And yet, he was also the boy who won awards, who was praised by teachers, who served as a Boy Scout. The dissonance between his surface presentation and his interior world would become the defining paradox of his entire life. Bundy enrolled at the University of Washington in Seattle in 1966, initially studying Chinese, then switching to psychology. He was a mediocre student by his own early admission, but an extraordinarily capable social performer. In 1967, he met and fell deeply in love with a woman researchers often refer to as Stephanie Brooks, a pseudonym used in many accounts to protect her privacy. She was everything Bundy aspired to: wealthy, educated, poised, from a prominent family. By most accounts, she represented not just romantic love to Bundy, but a class aspiration, a world he desperately wanted to belong to and feared he never would. She broke up with him in 1968, reportedly finding him immature and lacking direction. The rejection devastated him. What followed is one of the most chilling sequences in his biography. Bundy, over the next several years, methodically remade himself. He became politically active, working for the Washington State Republican Party and the 1972 gubernatorial campaign of Daniel J. Evans. He was described by colleagues as sharp, dependable, and impressive. He was accepted to law school, multiple law schools, in fact. He also tracked down Stephanie Brooks, re-entered her life as this new, polished version of himself, and proposed to her. She accepted. And then, once she was committed to him, he coldly and deliberately ended all contact. No explanation, no farewell. He simply vanished from her life, having exacted what he apparently considered a form of revenge. This pattern, the mask of charm, the pursuit of control, the performance of normalcy weaponized, would define everything that came next. The political connection. Bundy's political work is often overlooked, but historically notable. He was, by all accounts, a genuinely effective campaign operative. His supervisor at the Washington State Republican Party, Ross Davis, called him one of the most capable young men I have seen in politics. He even wrote a pamphlet on crime prevention for the Republican governor's office, a detail that, in retrospect, reads as almost incomprehensibly brazen. The precise date on which Ted Bundy committed his first murder is not definitively known. Some investigators believe he began killing as early as 1969, but 1974 is the year the documented murders begin in earnest, and the year the Pacific Northwest was gripped by terror. In January 1974, a young woman named Karen Sparks, an 18-year-old student at the University of Washington, was attacked in her basement bedroom in Seattle. She survived with permanent injuries but had no memory of the assault. A month later, on February 1, 1974, Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old psychology major and ski report broadcaster, disappeared from her room near the University of Washington campus. Only her nightgown, stained with blood, remained. She would not be found alive. Over the next several months, more young women disappeared from campuses and communities across Washington and Oregon: Donna Gail Manson, Susan Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Carroll Ball, George Ann Hawkins. Each disappearance was investigated individually. The connections between them were slow to emerge, in part because law enforcement agencies across different jurisdictions did not systematically share information. This fragmentation of investigation would haunt the case for years. Lake Sammamish, a day that changed everything. On July 14, 1974, a sunny Sunday at Lake Sammamish State Park outside Seattle, Bundy committed what would become one of the most heavily witnessed and significant episodes of his killing career. Over the course of a single afternoon, he approached multiple women at the crowded park using a fake arm sling and introducing himself, bizarrely, as Ted. He successfully lured two women, Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Naslund, away from the park under the guise of needing help with his sailboat. Both were murdered. Their remains, along with those of earlier victims, were discovered months later in a wooded area east of Seattle. The Lake Sammamish abductions were witnessed by dozens of people. For the first time, investigators had descriptions: a handsome young man named Ted driving a tan or bronze Volkswagen Beetle. A composite sketch was released. Thousands of tips poured in, including, reportedly, tips naming Ted Bundy. They were not acted upon. In September 1974, Bundy relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, to enroll at the University of Utah College of Law. The murders followed him. In Utah, he killed Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Ann Smith, the daughter of Midvale's police chief, Laura Ann Amy, and Deborah Jean Kent. He also attempted an abduction in Utah that would prove to be his first significant legal exposure. In November 1974, Carol Daronch, an 18-year-old woman, was approached by a man identifying himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department. He told her someone had attempted to break into her car at a local mall. He escorted her to his Volkswagen Beetle and, once inside, attempted to handcuff her and produced a crowbar. She fought back with extraordinary courage and managed to escape, screaming, onto the street and flagging down a passing car. She survived. Her account gave investigators their most detailed description yet. Bundy also killed in Colorado Karen Eileen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Lynn Oliverson, and others, often near ski resorts in the mountains. The first arrest, on August 16, 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer named Bob Hayward spotted Bundy's Volkswagen Beetle idling in a residential neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. When Bundy fled and was pulled over, a search of his car revealed a ski mask, handcuffs, a crowbar, rope, and an ice pick. He was charged initially with possession of burglary tools, but Carol Daronch identified him in a lineup. He was tried for her kidnapping in 1976 and convicted, sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. He was then extradited to Colorado to face murder charges. And it was in Colorado that Ted Bundy made the decision that would define the next chapter of his story. Ted Bundy escaped from custody twice. Each escape is remarkable not only for its audacity, but for what it reveals about Bundy's intelligence, planning, and the underestimation of his danger by those responsible for holding him. The first escape came in June 1977 at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado, where Bundy was representing himself, a decision that granted him unusual access to the courthouse law library. During a recess, he jumped from a second-floor window and fled into the mountains. He was recaptured 8 days later, weakened by altitude and hunger. The second escape, 6 months later, was meticulously planned. Bundy had been quietly losing weight for months, enough to squeeze through a hole he chiseled in the ceiling of his cell. On December 30th, 1977, he crawled through the gap, made his way through the ceiling space of the jail, lowered himself into the jailer's apartment directly below, which happened to be empty, changed into street clothes, and walked out the front door. He was not discovered missing for 15 hours. He traveled to Chicago by plane, then to Ann Arbor, then to Atlanta, and finally to Tallahassee, Florida, where he rented a room under a false name near the Florida State University campus. He had been free for weeks before anyone in Florida had any reason to know Ted Bundy was in their state. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, Ted Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee. In a span of roughly 15 minutes, he attacked 4 sleeping women. Margaret Bowman, 21, and Lisa Levy, 20, were killed. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were severely beaten and injured. A short time later, the same night, Bundy attacked another woman, Cheryl Thomas, at her apartment several blocks away, fracturing her skull and leaving her with permanent hearing loss and balance impairment. The crimes were so savage that the medical examiner noted bite marks on one of the victims, a detail that would later prove pivotal in court. Weeks later, on February 9th, Bundy abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach in Lake City, Florida, his youngest confirmed victim. He was arrested for the final time on February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida. A police officer ran the plates on a stolen Volkswagen Beetle Bundy was driving and found they were stolen. After a brief struggle, Bundy was in custody for the last time. Ted Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders, held in Miami in the summer of 1979, was one of the first American criminal trials to be televised nationally. It drew comparisons, then and since, to a media spectacle, and it fundamentally altered the relationship between criminal justice and broadcast media in the United States. Bundy again chose to represent himself with advisory counsel. He cross-examined witnesses, made legal arguments, and performed, because there is no other word for it, for the cameras. He received fan mail. Women attended the trial to watch him. One woman who repeatedly attended said openly that she found him attractive. This phenomenon, the dark celebrity of the accused killer, disturbed legal scholars, criminologists, and the public in equal measure. It sparked a debate about televised trials, the media's role in criminal proceedings, and what sociologists would come to call the Bundy effect, the dangerous mythology of the charming, intelligent killer. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Bite mark analysis, a then emerging forensic technique, matched impressions on victim Lisa Levy's body to Bundy's teeth with extraordinary specificity. Forensic expert Dr. Richard Sauviron presented the comparison to the jury in detail. Bundy was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death. A second trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach followed. He was again convicted and again sentenced to death. For nearly a decade, Bundy lived on death row at Florida State Prison. He pursued endless legal appeals, delaying his execution year after year. And he talked to lawyers, to investigators, to journalists, and to FBI behavioral scientists, speaking about his crimes in the third person as though analyzing someone else. Among those who interviewed him were FBI agents Robert Ressler and William Hamire, who spent hundreds of hours with Bundy as part of the Bureau's landmark research into the psychology of violent offenders. Those interviews formed part of the foundational research for the FBI's behavioral science unit and contributed directly to what would become criminal profiling. In the final days before his execution, with all appeals exhausted, Bundy shifted tactics. He began confessing, selectively, strategically, offering information on unsolved murders in exchange for execution delays. He claimed to have killed 30 women. Some investigators believe the true number is higher, potentially as many as 100, particularly if early, undocumented crimes are included. He gave extended interviews to Dr. James Dobson, a Christian psychologist, in which he blamed pornography for his crimes, a claim widely dismissed by criminologists and psychologists as deflection and manipulation, consistent with his lifelong pattern of avoiding accountability. On January 23, 1989, the night before his execution, he provided investigators with detailed location information for remains of victims whose bodies had never been found. On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 in the morning, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, a crowd of several hundred people had gathered through the night. When the announcement was made, some cheered, others held signs. The mood was complex: relief, anger, and a strange grief for the women whose deaths had brought the world to that moment. Ted Bundy's legacy extends far beyond the horror of his crimes. His case reshaped American law, forensic science, investigative practice, and public culture in ways that are still felt today. On the investigative side, the failure to link Bundy's crimes across state lines for years was a direct catalyst for the development of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, launched in 1985. VICAP created a national database for sharing information on violent crimes across jurisdictions, precisely to prevent the kind of investigative fragmentation that allowed Bundy to operate freely across 7 states. The forensic use of bite mark evidence in Bundy's trial, however contested the methodology has since become in broader legal contexts, was a landmark moment in the use of forensic odontology in American courts. The FBI's death row interviews with Bundy contributed to groundbreaking research published in the 1980s that established the modern framework for understanding serial offenders. The typology of organized versus disorganized killers, the role of fantasy in escalating violent behavior, and the significance of childhood trauma and attachment disorders in the development of violent psychology. Culturally, Bundy's case, and particularly his televised trial, accelerated the transformation of true crime into mass entertainment, with consequences that researchers and ethicists debate to this day. The question of how we cover violent crime without glamorizing it, or how we discuss perpetrators without erasing victims, traces directly to the Bundy media moment of 1979. And his victims, Linda Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Nasland, Carol DeRonch, who survived, Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, Laura Amy, Deborah Kent, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Shelley Robertson, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Karen Chandler, Kathy Kleiner, Cheryl Thomas, Kimberly Leach, and others whose names we may never know. They are the true historical record of Ted Bundy, not his charm, not his legal maneuvers, not the documentaries or the dramatizations, them. Ted Bundy wanted to be remembered as exceptional, as brilliant, unique, and incomprehensible. The truth is both simpler and more unsettling. He was a man who learned to present one face to the world while hiding another. He exploited trust, exploited gender dynamics that made women feel obligated to help a man in distress, and exploited institutional failures in law enforcement that were too slow to adapt to an era of geographic mobility. Understanding him does not excuse him, but it does, and this is the uncomfortable point, remind us that the most dangerous things in this world are rarely the things that look dangerous. Thank you for watching. If this video added something to your understanding of this difficult history, please consider subscribing. And as always, sources, further reading, and documentary links are in the description below.